Franky is about to do what even Dr. Vegapunk couldn't. Replicate Logia Devil Fruit powers. Not with artificial devil fruits or green blood knockoffs, but with new tech and old tech you probably forgot even existed. And now in the Elbaf arc, those tools might actually come together, starting with the 3,000-year-old abandoned lab we saw in chapter 1144. But before we break that down, before we get into why Franky could pull this off, we need to talk about why Logia powers are borderline unhinged to begin with. Then we'll connect the dots between ancient tech, the forgotten upgrades, and why Elbaf might be the only place this theory doesn't immediately self-destruct. Finally, we'll go over how Franky could actually build it. No devil fruit required, just cola and a mild disregard for ocean regulations. And if you left Egghead wondering why Franky didn't get a power-up while little clones were getting god-tier combat abilities, you're not alone. But Elbaf might be his moment. This arc isn't just about gods. The Franky hype train has no brakes, and it's gonna run on cola. Let's get into it. Let's start with a question that sounds simple but hits way harder than it should. What actually makes Logia power so different from every other devil fruit? Because if we're talking about how Franky could fake one, we need to understand why nobody's managed to do it. Not Vegapunk, not Caesar, not anyone. Compared to Paramecia and Zone Fruits, both of which offer relatively grounded, if not quirky upgrades, Logias are in a league of their own. It took the series, I'm not going to say decades, but decades to introduce Haki just to make these powers manageable. See, with a Logia, you don't just control an element, you become it. Your body dissolves, reforms, scatters, fire, smoke, magma, light. Your physical form gets replaced entirely by something untouchable. That alone gives you 3 core advantages. First, full elemental transformation. You stop being flesh and blood, you're not just intangible, you're environmental. You try to punch someone like Smoker or Kizaru, and your fist just passes through mist and photons. Second is regeneration. Logias don't flinch when they're hit, they reassemble. Unless you're using Haki, Sea Stone, or an elemental counter, your attacks might as well not exist. Third is area of effect control. Logias reshape the battlefield by just showing up. Akainu can melt the ground, Aokiji freezes the sea, Anel turns the sky into an execution chamber, Kizaru blinds people with his existence. These aren't just powers, they're full-scale environmental hazards. So yeah, it makes total sense that even Vegapunk couldn't replicate one, because to fake a Logia, it's not enough to look like an element. You have to move like one, strike like one, feel untouchable. You're not just copying a power, you're recreating an entire experience. And this is where Franky comes in, the self-made cyborg who reverse-engineered Vegapunk's tech and literally installed it into his nipples. Vegapunk recreated Kizaru's lasers, and Franky took that and turned it into radical beam. That is innovation right there. So why stop at light? Why not fire? Why not smoke? Why not lightning? Because light as an element is predictable. You can bend it, reflect it, measure it. Fire and magma, they're unstable. You can't exactly run a diagnostic on lava without melting your motherboard. That's why Vegapunk could build a light weapon, not a light-based life form, which makes the idea of Franky pulling this off way more than just cool. It's narratively meaningful. So what would it actually take for Franky to fake a Logia? Because let's be clear, if you're trying to simulate a Logia, you're not copying a power, you're replicating a full experience. One that's designed to feel impossible to counter, and that experience breaks down into 3 brutal components. First is visual illusion. You have to look like your body is dissolving into elemental matter. Sparks and flame decals are just not going to cut it. People need to believe you're no longer solid, like you just disappeared into smoke and reformed on the other side of the battlefield. It has to be convincing. Full on, I think that guy just became fire levels of visual chaos. Second is fluid movement. You can't just stand there looking all spicy. You gotta move like the element itself. Your body needs to break apart, flow through attacks, reassemble mid-combat. It's not just animation, it's psychology. You're selling the fantasy that you're untouchable, and if your movements don't match the illusion, the whole thing falls apart. And third, and this is the one that makes or breaks it, elemental impact. You can't just shimmer like light. You have to blind people. You can't just puff into smoke and expect a standing ovation unless the smoke chokes the enemy out or makes the fire department call it quits. Logia users alter the terrain by existing. If your fake powers don't do real damage, you're just cosplaying. But the fact that all 3 of these traits are so specific, that's exactly what makes this theory so exciting, because Elbaf might be the only place in the world where Franky could find the pieces to actually make them work. With all the crazy shit going on in Elbaf currently, you gotta admit, it is the perfect backdrop to make the possible impossible. Wait, I got that flipped around. Yes, let your dreams be dreams. Don't chase after them. Because there's three key elements that make this feel like an actual in-world possibility. First, dials. Yeah, remember those? Skypiea tech? Shells that can store and release raw elemental energy, sound, fire, air, pressure, light. And just when we thought we were completely done with dials, Chapter 1144 drops a tone dial out of nowhere, courtesy of Gunko, a celestial dragon that's somehow moved by Brook's music. Because sure, even the most pretentious nobles can't resist a banger. Next, the abandoned lab, same chapter. Lilith scans it and drops the bombshell that it's over 3,000 years old. That's pre-world government, void century territory, which means there could be blueprints, failed experiments, or actual fragments of pre-apocalyptic tech sitting inside. Tech that no one else knows how to use, but someone like Franky might. And finally, there's the Storm Cloud Sleep Tid, one of the sleep tids born from Killingham's Devil Fruit. My money is on you definitely need something elemental, something reactive, even to stand a chance against this thing. Small addendum. This is me recording after chapter 1146 dropped. Looks like Franky beat the shit out of Mr. Not Zeus, but the thing's still lying around, so maybe something... I don't know. I pray to God Oda did not fuck me right when I was about to drop this theory. So, what do these three things have in common? Okay, maybe not a whole lot on paper, but this is a theory video. If I weren't legally obligated to draw imaginary strings between unrelated lore bits, the YouTube algorithm would throw me in shadow ban hell. So, let's connect them. Franky's probably gonna throw hands with bootleg Zeus, and if the sleep tid turns out to be elemental, and it sure looks like it, he's gonna need something different to counter it. That's where the lab comes in, because if a stash of old dials are buried in that ruin, that's a literal game changer. Given Elbaf Skypiea parallels from the themes to the world building, it's not a stretch to think that some of that stuff made its way here, or maybe originated from here. And that rediscovery is the moment it clicks for Lilith. She sees how the dials work, how they store, release, and behave like real elemental forces, and suddenly, Vegapunk's failure to replicate Logias start to make sense. I'd imagine Lilith wouldn't know about dials too much, neither would Vegapunk, because we haven't really seen them at Egghead. Franky might not have been at Skypiea, but he's been glued to Usopp for years. They've probably taken dials apart and rebuilt them for fun. They're the Straw Hats' entire engineering division anyway. And then there's Ripley, a biology teacher. Yeah, it sounds random until you remember that simulating a Logia involves transforming a body into something elemental. That's a biology meets metaphysics issue, and Ripley might be really qualified to help bridge that gap. Now, here's where it stops being about the science and starts being about meaning. Because Elbaf isn't just the right setting for this theory, just because it's got cool old tech lying around. It's the right setting because it's a story about two forces colliding. And no, not pirates and the government, that's surface level. The real tension in Elbaf is progress versus tradition. On one side, you've got the old school giants, battle-tested legends who see strength as sacred. To them, honor comes from war, legacy comes from pain, and anything that deviates from that is weakness. They're living in the past because the past gave them identity. And then there's the newer generation, giants raised in a world without war. They value peace, diplomacy, innovation, but the more they lean into that, the more they lose touch with the warrior pride that once defined them. And neither side has figured out how to bridge the gap. If this sounds familiar, it should, because we've seen this before. Back in Skypiea with the Nolan flashback, Nolan and Kalvara clashed over medicine, science, and sacred beliefs. Two philosophies, both valid, that couldn't coexist because no one knew how to hold space for contradiction. And Elbaf has the same conflict, just scaled up. But it's not just about progress versus tradition. Elbaf is where every ideological collision in One Piece starts echoing back. You got fate versus free will, playing out through Loki and the God's Knights. You got freedom and laughter versus destruction, embedded in the split myth of Nika. Is he a liberator or a walking apocalypse? And then you got strength versus compassion, with Shanks' philosophy shining through, choosing peace when he could have burned the entire world. And beauty versus pain, which is literally weaponized in Summers' thorn fruit. A rose that cuts just as much as it stuns. And all of this, it's pointing at something bigger. Not who's right, but whether anything can hold two truths at once without falling apart. At the core of Elbaf's conflict, and honestly, the series as a whole, is the illusion of separation. The idea that you have to choose. The power must come from one side or the other. That you're either tradition or progress, nature or tech. a god of freedom or a god of destruction, but never both. And that's what makes Franky's Logia simulation so thematically loaded, because he wouldn't be picking a side, he'd be merging them. He's fusing elemental chaos with mechanical control. He's not erasing the boundaries, he's wielding them together. And if Elbaf is where opposites finally learn to coexist, then Franky's body might be the first working prototype of that idea. Because if Franky's build is a metaphor, then Luffy is the proof that the metaphor works. Luffy is the character dismantling the illusion of separation from the get-go. He's not a strategist or scholar, and ideology debates don't interest him, and yet he becomes the answer to them. As the embodiment of the Sun God Nika, Luffy frees people and disrupts systems. He liberates others from their cages, both literal and the mental ones. And let's not forget Shanks. He doesn't have much screen time, but his philosophy holds weight. He shows that power can gain respect without conquest, demonstrating that strength exists to protect peace. And so Shanks and Luffy together symbolize a bridge, not a side in a war of opposites. And this bridge is love, care, and showing up when it matters. It holds contradictions without flinching. So when Franky simulates a Logia, it wasn't just to be a tech showcase, it would serve as a thematic mic drop. And so by merging elemental chaos with mechanical structure, Franky shows Elbaf and us that power doesn't come from choosing sides, but from integration. Nature meets technology. And if this sounds familiar, it's likely because you've seen it before, just with more moss and fewer pirates. Elbaf's ancient lab noticeably resembles something from Castle in the Sky, and it's not just a visual nod, I believe it's thematic. The Laputa robots were once symbols of power and destruction, but by the time we encounter them, they've transformed into caretakers and gardeners, machines built to destroy, now surrounded by flowers. What Elbaf is exploring is a culture that doesn't need to burn its past to build a future, where strength is redefined, power isn't inherited or imposed, it's chosen and shared. And Franky's Logia simulation would embody this idea, just in hardware. Next, we'll finally explore how he could actually pull this off with the pieces already in place. So here's where the theory stops being hypothetical and starts looking like something Franky could actually build. Because up until now, we've been talking about what a Logia is and what kind of tools could simulate one. But let's ground it for a second. Elbaf and Egghead have already introduced the 3 key components needed to fake a Logia: visual illusion, elemental motion, and real-world impact. From Egghead, we've got Vegapunk's hologram systems. Lilith was there, she remembers how that worked. From Elbaf, we got painter minerals that produce semi-liquid light constructs that behave like living rainbows. They shimmer and flow and react like fire or mist. That's exactly the kind of fluid motion a Logia simulation needs. And now we've got dials, reintroduced in chapter 1144, Sky Island tech that stores and releases actual elemental forces, fire, gas, light, wind, and kinetic energy. This right here is a build kit. So the real question is, how would Franky turn all of that into a system? Enter the 3-pillar Logia system. The hologram system fools the eye, the painter tech mimics motion, the dial arsenal creates real-world effects. And because this is Franky we're talking about, it wouldn't be some bolt-on accessory. He built the whole thing into his body, powered by Cola. So now that we've defined the 3 core components, let's talk about what this actually looks like as an invention. But first, we're gonna talk about you liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and ringing the bell so you know when a new power-up theory drops. But seriously, let's talk about what it actually looks like. Because this wouldn't be some sleek minimalist upgrade. It would be loud, it would be chunky, functional in the weirdest, most Franky-coded way possible. At the heart of it is the dial loadout bay, a modular switching hub built into his belt buckle. Picture something like the soldier docking system from the Sunny, rotating compartments, labeled slots, mechanical clunks, except instead of switching out battle vehicles, it's rotating between elemental dials. Heat dials, flash dials, breath dials, ready to go at a moment's notice. And it's not just a cool aesthetic, the location matters, because the belt buckle would link directly to Franky's Cola core, giving the whole system a centralized power source without needing additional fuel logistics. No Cola, no Logia. Simple, clean, canon. From there, the system expands outward across his body. You'd have holographic projector strips installed across key areas: shoulders, chest, thighs, forearms, compact enough to stay hidden until activated, but wide enough to throw hard light projections that simulate full body transformations. Then comes the painter mineral layer, a reactive outer coating or internal lining that wraps around his limbs, and these minerals would give Franky the flowing, liquid-like elemental motion, fire trailing from his fists, light arcing from his frame, smoke billowing off of his legs when he moves. The whole system would operate on thought-activated neural sync, meaning no voice commands or levers needed mid-fight. When Franky wants to become fire, his system registers the intent and switches the dial, projection, and painter flow accordingly. It's not just cosplay, it's function built around flair, Franky style. Now let's imagine how the system actually plays out in a fight. Let's say Franky wants to mimic Ace's Fire Fist. He logs in the heat dial. That's the payload, the part that makes this more than cosplay. The system reads his intent. Could be neural, could be a command, Fire Fist, shouted mid-battle, because sometimes the anime flair matters. Either way, the moment he commits, the sequence kicks in. Step 1, the hologram strips activate. His arm begins to glow, not with heat, but with the idea of fire. Flames start to engulf his forearm, flickering across his frame. It looks like combustion, but it's just pure projection. Clean, stylized, and loud enough to make anyone watching flinch. Step 2, the painter layer responds. This is where the element starts to move. The prism-coated minerals refract the holographic fire into a flowing, semi-physical trail, the kind of fluid motion you expect from a real flame. It curls, it dances, it builds behind his fist like a pressure wave waiting to burst. But it's not static. The shape flexes with him. It scales up as he charges, giving the illusion of something wild barely being held together. And now step 3, the heat dial discharges. The energy launches forward, not as a fireball, but as a heat of blast strong enough to distort the air. The illusion and the impact sync perfectly. You see the fire, you feel the burn, you never see the trick. It's not fire in the traditional sense, but it acts like it. It moves like it hurts like it, and in that moment, Franky doesn't just look like he's throwing Ace's Fire Fist, he is selling it. Now, let's say Franky needs to do more than just look like a Logia. Let's say somebody actually tries to hit him. What happens then? So, defense gets tricky. Because here's the thing, unless Franky's body actually disappears, he can't sell true Logia intangibility. But what if it kind of did? So here's the messy but possibly brilliant idea. We bring in Vegapunk's warp tech, the same teleportation system we saw when he first appeared in front of Luffy back on Egghead. We know Vegapunk had it working, and we got Lilith over here. Same brain, same knowledge, different assets. Now, let's not say Franky can warp his entire body. I feel like that's too energy intensive. So instead, what if you could actually warp specific body parts, like an arm? Kind of like what Obito does in Naruto, except without the sad backstory and losing your crush to your best friend. So picture this. A Marine throws a punch at Franky's chest. The system activates. The hologram generates a projection of flames, which in turn triggers the painter system to grant the hologram that malleable, flowing movement. And then, instead of dodging, Franky's chest plate just isn't there anymore. It phased out, warped somewhere else within a few meters. The punch goes through nothing. The illusion sells the elemental vanish. The warp tech makes the hit physically miss. And if he really wants to push the fantasy, he could just let off a dial burst mid-phase, just a pulse of heat. So it feels like an elemental reaction happened instead of a dodge. Now I'm gonna be honest. This idea is a fucking mess. Not clean at all. I don't know exactly how Franky would incorporate Vegapunk's warping system into his body, and I'm not gonna pretend I've engineered his entire eternal circuitry, but it's Franky, he can probably figure some shit out. And to make this work seamlessly, he probably need observation hockey. It's not confirmed that he has it yet though, but hey, thank Katakuri's future sight. The ability to sense intent, move preemptively, and create the illusion that he's tangible. Katakuri's not a Logia either, but with future sight, he kind of fights like one. And look, maybe this isn't a perfect system, I'm not a power scaler, I'm not Oda. There's only so much time I have left on this earth to make something that sounds plausible, so give me a break. What makes this system so believable isn't just the tech, it's that it feels like something Franky would actually build. He's always been about modular design, docking stations, pop-out weapons, arms that turn into other arms, a belt that switches dials. That's not out of character, that's just a regular Tuesday. So if anyone's going to replicate the abilities of a Logia Devil Fruit without actually eating one, it's the guy who's been faking it with hard and hardware since day one. If Franky really is the key to showing how nature and technology can finally work together, then maybe that's just not character development. It's a clue, a hint about what the Ancient Kingdom and Joy Boy had their hands on. And yeah, if you want to go deeper into that idea, I got a whole theory on what the One Piece might actually be.
I make sure you know that I hit you like I'm on your ID. I'm aiming the album to fall off. It's pretty ironic.